Your data is like gold to hackers, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder. Are you protected? McAfee helps shield you, blocking suspicious texts, malicious emails, and fraudulent websites. McAfee Secure VPN lets you browse safely, and its AI-powered text scam detector spots threats instantly. You'll also get up to $2 million of award-winning antivirus and identity theft protection, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
The hardest thing about helping your child when they're struggling with their anxiety, when they're struggling with their mood, when you're really concerned about them, it is an unfortunate situation in which your feelings about this are going to be at their pinnacle. Because this is your kid, you're worried, you're afraid, all the things that you feel. So it's a time when your feelings are going to be at their pinnacle, but when your need to make decisions based not on your emotional state or your child's emotional state is going to be enormously helpful.
Welcome to Season 7 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we'll talk about managing anxiety and all the other emotions too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious. I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author. I've been a therapist for 35 years. Parenting can be a Flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll tell you what to do and what to say. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
I'm good. How do you like doing the podcast so far?
Well, I just find the people so enjoyable to work with.
Yes. Well, one of the complaints that your wife has, which just bore out with us, is that usually we'd get on the podcast, the time we agree to record, and then she and I would chat and catch up and talk about this and that. And so now she's cut out of that. And you and I just did the same thing. So
Yes.
It's very nice to be able to chat either with you or with Robin, but I get to be in all the chats and you guys don't get to be in all the chats.
She has mentioned that she always enjoyed that element of it. Would often, after she recorded with you, say like, oh, Lynn and I talked about blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. All right. Now you have to do that.
But we are in cold New England and she is in Mexico with our son. So.
Yeah. Yeah. My son's in Florida.
Oh.
Yeah.
What's he doing?
I don't know. He's hanging out. His girlfriend is a teacher and she has this week off. So they went to Florida. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So talk about differentiation.
Yes, that's the topic for today. So that doesn't sound like a very exciting topic, but actually, when you know what it is and the way that I talk about it, it probably is one of the most influential things that I teach the parents that I work with. It's also referred to as discrimination strategies or the skill of differentiation. And full credit for teaching me this goes to my wonderful teacher, Michael Yapko. I've known Michael since I was 26 years old. He is an incredible expert in the treatment of depression. We did an episode with him, Robin and I want to have him back soon. He is a wealth of knowledge, and he really changed the way that I thought about solving problems. He changed the way I thought about doing therapy because I was trained at the graduate program that I was in was very psychodynamic, which is sort of psychoanalysis. You're looking at a lot of the relationships and what were the impact of family relationships and all that kind of stuff that people associate with more Freudian stuff. That was my program. It never really rang true to me. And meeting Michael was one of those moments where I started hearing what he was saying. I just went to a training with him and it was sort of like, oh my gosh, this makes sense to me. And it has made sense to me for 35 years. If you read the Anxiety Audit, which is actually dedicated to Michael, if you listen to the way that I talk about working with anxious kids, I have been highly, highly influenced by this way of thinking, this way of solving problems. And the wonderful thing about it is that it's not complicated. It is a skill that we want kids to have because it shows up over and over and over again in how we make decisions and how we make choices. And so if you think about anxiety, if you think about anxiety disorders, a lot of times parents are trying to figure out how do they make a decision for their child, who's going to be put in charge, What are the options that they're looking at? And this is just a really great way of making sure that you are making good decisions and that you are looking at problems in a way that lead you to solutions and really lead you to taking action, which why questions don't really lead you to taking action. They're interesting. Why do I feel this way? Or why do you think you get so angry when your mother talks about green beans? Whatever. Interesting, but this is really about helping families move forward.
Mm-hmm. And something that you've taken from Michael, and which we heard in the conversation that he had with you and Robin on Flusterclux, is the importance of action and how debilitating moods and depression can discourage you from doing that which is essential to get out of the depression.
Absolutely. And when we talk about rumination, which is that negative thought process of going over things over and over and over again, why questions can really lend themselves to that. Like, why did I say that? Or why didn't I do this? Or why am I so stupid? Those questions that we ask, usually after the fact, it doesn't really help us figure out how to move forward. So just take that simple example of why did I say that? Or why did I make that decision? If we ask a how question, then we're saying, how do I make a better decision next time? Or how can I figure out the difference between when I should shut my mouth and when I should offer an opinion? And so it begins to help kids see that they have options and action, which you're exactly right, because both anxiety and depression are all about passivity, which is one of the things we talked about last time. So how is a very activating word. It's a very problem-solving word, and it's very concrete in helping families get unstuck.
Great. What would be one of those how questions that you have chatted about with your clients to help them?
So one of the ones that comes up very frequently with people that are trying to help their child move forward or help their family move forward is they'll say, how do I know if I'm pushing my child too hard? So that's a very good question. How do I know if I'm pushing my child too hard? Or how do I know if this is the right decision? That's a bigger one. How do I know if this activity works for my child or it's something that they're just anxious about? So those are how questions that come up very frequently. And I love when a family asks me a question like that because now they're looking for a way to discriminate. They're looking for a way to figure out what's the best decision to make. A lot of times people will say, why are our mornings so hard? Why can't we just get out the door? Why does it always turn into such a struggle? And I say, well, let's put the word how in front of that. How do we make mornings easier? And sometimes I ask, how do you think you make mornings hard? So I was just doing a consult with a young woman and her mom and trying to get her to school, which is a very often thing that I'm called in to talk to families about by schools. And the question I asked the mom was, how do you not get to school every day? Mom said, oh, I just enable her. I know I enable her. And I said, how do you do that? If I were in that other way of thinking, I could say, well, why do you think you enable her? Okay. That's a very easy question to answer. Why does an anxious parent enable a child? Because they don't know what else to do and they're trying to not upset things and they're exhausted. And this mom said, I'm just trying to protect my child. I'm just trying to keep her feeling okay. All right, great. Question asked, question answered. The how do we get her to school every day, or how do you guys show up late every day, is a much more activating question.
And a corollary to something that we discussed in the past few weeks about the importance of not being resigned to something being the way it is and the way it is forever thereafter, because engaging in that action can lead away from this struggle that families have, that all families have.
Yeah. And that's a very good point, because even by asking the how question, I am laying down the groundwork that we're going to do something differently.
And there is a path to do something differently.
Right.
Because a lot of times people are just a bit in a box and they don't know the way out.
That's right. And if you ask a why question, why do you feel that way? Oh, well, they say, maybe it's because of this or maybe it's because of that. One of the things that my field loves to do is to come up with stories or come up with possible connections, come up with theories. Whatever theory you come up with really depends on how you were trained or who you're influenced by or what book you just read. When you're asking how, that's a pretty theory-free question. It's a pretty concrete question. One of the questions I get all the time is, how do I get my child to get off their phone? And I did a little Instagram reel about this because people will ask me this question. I'll say, you got to just take the phone out of the bedroom. And people would say, how do you do that? I was like, well, you use your thumbs and your hand. But really what they were asking is, how do I do that without upsetting my child?
Sure.
How do I do that easily? So when we start asking these how questions and then we answer those questions and we come up with a plan, then we are moving. The other reason why I love these how questions is because it shows me where the gap is. So if I said to you, like say you were saying to me, oh, I am so frustrated. Every time I try and bake a cake, it comes out flat. It's not moist. I don't know. I want to be able to make a delicious cake. And every time I do it, it just tastes terrible. And I say, well, how do you measure your ingredients? And you look at me blankly and say, I don't know. Well, then there we know where the gap is, right? Or if I say to a family, how do you get places on time? And they look at me blankly. One of the huge questions that I ask families all the time, particularly if they're having trouble getting out of the house or having trouble getting to school, is how do you guys decide whether or not your child is going to school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it depends on how they feel. So if they have a tummy ache, if they have this. Now, the second question is, how do we know if we should send a child to school if they're complaining of a tummy ache? Because we know that tummy aches are a big part of being anxious. If you don't have a child who's anxious and the child wakes up and says, oh, mommy, my tummy doesn't feel good. Well, how do you decide? Your child just told you that they're feeling sick. Pretty straightforward. But if you've got an anxious child and they wake up every morning, at least every Monday through Friday, and say, oh, mommy, I have a tummy ache, how do you decide? How do you differentiate between when do you send your child with the tummy ache and when you keep them home? So if I'm working with a family and we're asking that question, and I might say, how do you decide? So they'll say, well, if they don't feel good, or if they complain, or of course, if they're melting down. But really then we have some more information. They have a tummy ache every morning. So if we're talking about an anxious child, what do we know about tummy aches in anxious children? We know that 13% of kids will have functional abdominal pain at some point in their life. It's very high in anxious kids. So we are not making the decision based on whether or not you have a tummy ache. We are not saying, I'm going to decide to send this child to school with a tummy ache, because we're differentiating between the child that has a history of anxiety and tummy aches and the child who wakes up on a random Wednesday morning and says, I don't feel good. And you know that the norovirus is going around school. So when we ask those questions, then we begin to put those skills in. So the first thing about asking that how question is it shows me where the gap is. How do you decide, or how do you know? You've got a new driver and you say to them, how do you know if you should take the car out? We've got some weather coming. How do you know if you should take the car out or not? That's a differentiation skill you want a new driver to have. So you ask, and if they go, I don't know, well, then you better do some education about that. Or you should realize that maybe you can't trust them quite yet. They're a new driver. You're going to be more cautious. And then after I ask the question, how do you decide, or how do you know, or how do you choose? Then we come up with the criteria for choosing. So if you live in a studio apartment, how do you decide which dog breed to get? You better look at one that doesn't need a lot of exercise or a lot of space. If you have a studio apartment in New York and you get a border collie, you're going to have some trouble. But if you want to go hiking with your dog and you get a pug or a bulldog, that's not going to work out so well either. So it allows for that decision-making and that critical thinking. And again, it moves you toward action.
Well, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, maybe there's a few more questions that you've asked of clients in the past that you feel have been helpful.
Okay, great. I am so interested in how people do things well. I love watching the masters do their mastery. One class I so enjoyed, Thomas Keller, talking about cooking and techniques. I'm probably not going to ever make a meringue. I'm not. but just watching how he does it and the tips that I picked up, even just talking about salt and pepper, so enjoyable. And really, it becomes kind of this way of learning that's also this amazing escape. So with Masterclass, you are learning from the best so that you can become your best. It's the only streaming platform where you can learn and grow with over 200 of the world's best. For just $10 a month billed annually, a membership with Masterclass gets you unlimited access to every instructor. John Kabat-Zinn, meditation, amazing. Esther Perel, she's got so many helpful pieces of information about communication, about love. The classes really make a difference. 88% of members feel that Masterclass has made a positive impact on their lives. That's pretty awesome. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/fluster. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/fluster. masterclass.com/fluster.
I think one of the most important cleanses that we overlook is, ironically, cleansing the unhealthy cleaning products from your home. Here's the truth. Many conventional cleaning products are filled with harmful chemicals that can silently compromise your health. These products irritate your skin, disrupt your hormones, and even pollute the air inside your home. What if there was the most simple solution you could imagine? And it's called Branch Basics, that provides an all-natural concentrate. Then you just fill all the bottles that come with a set, from all-purpose cleansers, hand washing, bathroom cleanser, even laundry detergent. Branch Basics is here to help you make the switch. Their premium starter kit includes one powerful concentrate that replaces dozens of toxic cleaners. That makes it easier than ever to detox your home. From scrubbing counters and washing laundry to cleaning your bathroom and even rinsing produce, this plant and mineral-based formula does it all without harsh chemicals. No fragrances, parabens, endocrine disruptors, and synthetic preservatives, so you can trust it's safe for babies, pets, and anyone with sensitivities. Branch Basics is biodegradable, human-safe, and making it ideal for families with pets or children. It was founded by 3 women, each with transformative personal experiences that inspired their mission. So check out their website. Overcoming chronic health challenges to discover the power of toxic-free living, their journeys are proof of the life-changing benefits of creating a truly healthy home. Make this year your year to say goodbye to toxic products. Right now, our listeners get 15% off the premium starter kit by using code FLUSTER at branchbasics.com. That's 15% off your new Branch Basics premium starter kit at branchbasics.com with promo code FLUSTER. Make 2025 your cleanest, healthiest year yet with Branch Basics. That's 15% off using code FLUSTER at branchbasics.com.
Did you know that Americans spend an average of 90% of their time indoors? But did you know that indoor air can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air? Okay, breathe easy with Air Doctor. It's the award-winning air purifier that eliminates 99.99% of dangerous contaminants like allergens, viruses, smoke, gases, mold spores, and more. Air Doctor was voted Best Air Purifier by Newsweek. So it's no surprise that 98% of Air Doctor customers agree their home's air feels cleaner, safer, and healthier. Unlike other air purifiers, Air Doctor captures invisible particles 100 times smaller than standard HEPA filters. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code Flusterclux to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, plus a 3-year warranty, an $84 value free. Get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com. airdoctorpro.com using promo code Flusterclux. Okay, we're back. All right, so here are some other very common how questions that I would ask, and that if you start asking, if you're listening to this and you're sort of stuck in your pattern, right? If you feel like, oh my God, I've tried everything, I don't know how to get out of this, what do I do? Here are some questions to sort of help your thinking. Parents ask me this all the time. How do I make mornings easier in my family? Okay, so the corollary to that, I might follow up and say, how do you think they are hard in your family. So I might say, are they on their phones when they wake up in the morning? Are you getting up in time? Is there a lot of negotiating going on? Because that really can slow down an anxious family or a family where a child has ADHD, right? We're negotiating. If you ask that question, how do things go off the rails in the morning? And that gives you a really important piece of information. One family I was working with, they couldn't get to school and they would have a meltdown and blah, 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 a lot of anxiety in the family. Mom was pretty anxious. And I said, how do things go off the rails in the morning? Because you guys, you lay out your clothes, you get up in time. It seems like you got things pretty under control, but it goes off the rails. And I said, how do you think it goes off the rails? And she said, my son won't eat breakfast. I tell him that we can't leave for school until he eats breakfast. So then what's the next question? How do you get some food in him without derailing the process? And also, a lot of kids in the morning, if you have a nervous tummy, your digestive system shuts down. You're not really hungry. You don't want to put food in your tummy. But that was the hill she was dying on. That was where things went off the rails. So just by me asking that question, the first question, how do things go off the rails? Breakfast. And then how do we get some food in him? At some point. So they figured out that if they got in the car, if she just gave him like a bag of almonds or whatever, he would eat them in the car. And if he didn't eat them in the car, it wasn't a big deal because he was going to get snack at 9:15 anyway. So she was making a rigid decision that they couldn't leave the house until he had breakfast. And we wanted to inject that flexibility. How do we get some food in him? How do I know if therapy is helping? That's a question I get a lot too. How do I know if this therapy is helping? So then you step back. How would you define helping? I might say, how did you pick this therapist? What are the criteria that you have? How would you define success in therapy? So how do I know if therapy is helping? How would you define success in therapy? That is a question I ask very early on. I was meeting with a teenager yesterday that I'd never met before, and I asked her that question I always ask. If it's 6 months from now or a year from now, and you're talking about this, how will you know it's helpful?
I like that. It's kind of like a North Star, too, of where she wants to go.
That's right. So she's letting me know what her goal is, what she wants to get out of this. And if I was working with a family and I asked, the parent was there too, and I would ask the parent, how would you know? Here you are coming to therapy, you're spending your time, you're spending your money. How do you define success in this?
Do you usually get a concrete response and a helpful, reasonable answer that makes sense?
Well, I get an answer that's helpful because it's indicative of what they're thinking. And that actually can sometimes guide where I go with the next question. So if I say, how do you define success in therapy? If they say, I don't know, well, then I've got some teaching to do. If they say, I just want to feel happy all the time, then I've got some teaching to do. If they say, I don't want to feel anxious anymore, then I've got some teaching to do. Well, this young person actually said, I just want to learn how to handle the stress of my schoolwork better because I know I'll get it done, but I have this pressure that I feel all the time isn't helpful to me, right? That's a wonderfully concrete answer. And so what I started talking to her actually is a differentiation skill is how do you know when you have to do your best and when it's okay to coast? Because one of the things that she said, I feel like I always have to do my best, which if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I hate the phrase when people say, as long as you're doing your best. And her parents had said that to her. She kind of internalized that as something that she should be able to do. And so I started working with her right away in that first session of how are we going to differentiate between when you have to do your best on something or when you want to do your best on something, whatever best means, and when it's okay to coast. So that was a really helpful conversation to have right off the bat. Another really helpful how question when we're talking about anxiety, because remember, anxiety likes to promote things to an emergency. How did you make this an emergency? When you ask a question like that, they start thinking about the process that they go through, the steps that they take that led them to this ultimate result. And how often do we hear from parents say, well, he just went from 0 to 60 and it just happened. And so when you start using those questions, how did you get to this place? How did you make this an emergency? How did you freak out? So I'll say to kids, well, how did you freak out? They say, oh, I was totally freaking out. And I don't say, why were you freaking out? Why were you freaking out? I mean, I might say that sometimes. Why were you freaking out? They say, well, I saw a spider. What's much more interesting to me is, how did you freak yourself out? What did you do inside to freak yourself out? And it makes them sort of begin to understand that this is a process that happens. Rather than something that happens to them, it's a process that happens, and they can begin to recognize the steps that take them to that place. When I'm talking to a really anxious parent, how did you make this situation an emergency? They sort of look at me, oh, and they'll say, oh, that's a very interesting question. Yes, it is. How did you make this an emergency? Yeah.
Those steps that you spoke of can be paused as opposed to what you just said a moment ago, 0 to 60, bang.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which implies complete absence of control.
Right. I don't know if I've told this story on this before. I've told this story quite a bit, actually, but I'm sure I've told it. I was working with a couple that she had an affair with someone she worked with. And they were deciding that they were going to work to keep their marriage together. And so I asked her, how did this happen? And she said, I don't know. I have no idea. It just happened. And I could see the husband was like, they'd been through this before. And if you asked her, why did this happen? She might come up with theories and maybe some interesting things, but I wanted to know, how did this happen? And so I gave her the homework assignment that she needed to make a list of 100 steps from the point of when she started flirting with the guy at work to when she ended up in bed with him. I wanted to know all the things that happened. And what I was saying in that homework assignment was, you made 100 decisions. And if you are sitting here in front of your husband saying, I don't know how this happens, and he's trying to feel like he wants to regain some trust in you, you better figure out how this happened so that then you can interrupt the steps. How do I not have an affair? How do you not have an affair? There are things we don't do, but she was saying like, I don't know. And that was not helpful to the husband, feeling as if she was taking some responsibility for it or beginning to look at the sequence of steps that got there. The same thing happens when we're talking about depression, right? So Michael will say depression doesn't just show up. So how did you get to this place? Or what are the steps that happened that took you to this place? It's not a blaming thing. It's not that you're saying, oh, I set out to do this. You're not saying, oh, I made this happen on purpose. But you're helping somebody step back and look and see, how did you get from point A to point Q? What are the steps? What are the patterns? What are the decisions that you made? If we're going back to talk about our cousin again, who adopted a few dogs that didn't work out very well, if I were to ask her back then, how do you decide which dog you're going to take home? I would bet that her criteria were ones that sounded great, but didn't really fit with her lifestyle. Because she was a young person who worked full time. She had an apartment. And if she took this dog that had a ton of energy, that wasn't very well trained yet because she didn't have the time to do the training, that chewed up furniture when it was left alone because it was a really social dog, what was going to happen when she left the dog alone when she was working full time? She was going to come home and find a mess in her house, which is what happened.
I wonder if people get some encouragement internally by understanding that they do make that processes evaluation effectively in many other parts of their lives. And they can understand, well, at work, I do follow steps. I do ask the proper questions. And you illuminating that it's the same process in the morning with breakfast as it might be at work gives them some courage and confidence. Know that they can do that.
Yes, that's an excellent point, because one of the other things that I do is that I'll give a homework assignment for somebody to keep track of those steps of something that they're very good at. So say I ask a family, how does morning turn into chaos every time? Or how do you make a decision whether or not you're going to go to this event or whatever? And they say, I don't know. And so I will look for something that I know that they're capable of doing, that they've already done. Say they have an apple orchard, and I'll say, okay, so how do you guys prepare trees? I mean, I'm just making this up. I should have picked something that I know something about.
Yes. You're making plain you are not very learned about apple orchards.
Okay. All right. Okay. How do you train for a 10K race? So say the family's like, we don't know how we do it. I don't know how it goes so offline. How does it go so off track? And I know that the parents have just ran a 10K. And I say, how do you train for a 10K? And I will say, your homework assignment is, I want you to go through the steps you took. You made the decision, we're going to run this 10K on Thanksgiving. And then what were the steps that you took? Or say somebody is really good at consistently doing something. So there's somebody who consistently goes to yoga or consistently pays their taxes on time or consistently makes a wonderful family dinner on Sunday. Every Sunday, the whole family comes over for a lovely dinner. How do you do that? And then you are exactly correct in what you're saying to them is this is a process of knowing what are the steps you take, what are the choices you make. How do you decide what to serve your family when they come for Sunday dinner? And they have a way of figuring that out. You know, my sister's family doesn't eat vegetables, so I have to make sure I do something about that, blah, 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 blah. And so you begin to, just like you say, give them the confidence, give them the courage that they can figure this out. And all we're doing is taking the same process of breaking something down, of putting those steps in place and moving it to something that feels more chaotic or that feels more uncertain because it's not what they're familiar with.
Right. Someone might say, well, when my sister's family comes over for lunch, there's no emotions involved.
Yeah,
but
right.
in the morning, our daughter gets so emotional and she gets so upset.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So then what would be the how question? So how do we help you deal with your feelings in a time when your feelings are not your friend? How do we help you compartmentalize your feelings? Which is something that I say to kids all the time. I was just saying this to somebody the other day because they were telling me about this and this and this. And I said, well, you know what the problem is here, don't you? And they were like, no, what? And I said, you're making a big decision and you're basing it on your feelings. And this isn't really a decision in which your feelings are going to be a good guide. There are other criteria that you need to pay attention to. So, and I will say to kids, one of the things about being anxious or being depressed or being angry or being disappointed is that we really give a lot of weight to the way we feel. And when we're making decisions, there are some decisions that we make based on how we feel. But most of the decisions that we have to make, particularly if you are a parent trying to help your anxious child, you're going to have these feelings. I'm not saying that we can get rid of them, but they are not the guiding light in the actions that you take. So one of the how questions may be, how are you going to support your child without your feelings being in charge? And then we have to work on that. And so what might we do? That's why I love to pull out the worry and give it a name. So say this mom says, oh, I get so wound up I feel so guilty. I feel so awful. I feel so terrible. I say, okay, so let's pull those big feelings out. Let's name them Florence. And what are the steps that you would take if Florence weren't in charge of this job? What are the things that we've talked about? And so that's that differentiation between when are your feelings helpful and when are they not? And that is also, just as you were saying, take it out of the content of your anxious kid in the morning. And you say to this person, say that they're a neonatal nurse. How do you put your feelings aside in order to do your job?
Mm.
And they know how to do that because you can't be a neonatal nurse and be caught up in your feelings because people are going through the hardest times in their lives. That was a story I was just telling you about the colleague who was telling me that they were making a really, really bad landing on an airplane and the flight attendant was crying. And the husband of my colleagues said to the flight attendant, you need to get your act together. Because that was not the time for the flight attendant to be expressing her feelings to the passengers on the plane. That wasn't her job. If you were a passenger, go ahead and cry. So that's really helpful when we use that differentiation of when are my feelings helpful or when should my feelings be in charge? Now, if you are a parent and say you go through a really tough time with your child, but you finally get them to school and, you're feeling terrible and you're feeling guilty. And then you think, I just feel like I was a terrible mom and it was so hard for me. So you think when I pick my child up for school, when my child gets off the school bus, I am going to greet them with a huge dose of full-on positive, I love you feelings. You're going to see your child, and the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say, I love you. Oh my gosh, that was a rough morning we went through. Come here. I got to give you a big snuggle. That's a really helpful time for those feelings to be right there in the front, but not in the time when you're trying to solve the problem or when the feelings are going to take over and get in the way of what you need to do. Yeah.
I imagine even big decisions between a couple, or even the decision to get married, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend, his brother was engaged to a woman. Everyone kind of scratched their heads like, is this a good match? And they asked him, why do you want to marry her? And his response was always, she's a kick. And they'd say, well, but have you all really thought about she's a kick? So they were Catholic, and part of the process was that the couple has to go and sit down with the priest. And the priest proceeded to ask them a lot of how questions. How are you going to raise the children? How are you going to decide where to live? They broke up on the ride home. True story.
Yeah. That's really funny. Well, because it wasn't so much of a kick anymore when the how questions illuminated all the differences that they had.
And his emotions and his feelings that she was a kick were getting in the way of what everyone else perceived as pretty practical obstructions that were on the horizon.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love that story. When we're trying to help our kids and when we're trying to help ourselves, people will say, oh, feelings are so important. And I get that. We're all going to have them. And emotional literacy, the ability to identify your feelings, the ability to put words to your feelings. But feelings only take you so far. And when we're making the big decisions in life, when you're buying a house and you walk into the house, or when you're buying a car, the first car that I bought myself, I bought this Mitsubishi Galant. And the salesman said to me, you're going to love this car. This is a chick car. And I was like, and you know me, like I'm not like a chick person, right? But I was like, oh, and it had like a moon roof, and it had more fancy little things than I'd ever had in a car because I'd always gotten hand-me-down cars, which is totally fine. But he totally pulled me into this idea that it was a chick car. I bought the car. The next day, I tried to start the car and it wouldn't start, which was kind of interesting. So I got it jumped. I was driving the car on the highway and it shut off.
Wow.
And that problem went on for a period of time. And actually, Mitsubishi had declared this car a lemon, and they ultimately had to replace the whole engine for me. But the car salesman didn't say, this is a lemon. The car salesman said, this is a chick car. And it was a totally feelings-based decision. And I got what I paid for. So there's so many situations, and it's sometimes fun. Another thing to ask your family or to think about is, what are the decisions that you've made that were really based on your feelings that ultimately didn't work out so great? How do we make decisions? How do we decide things? And just to sort of put a bow on it and to really sort of think about this, the hardest thing about helping your child when they're struggling with their anxiety, when they're struggling with their mood, when you're really concerned about them, it is an unfortunate situation in which your feelings about this are going to be at their pinnacle, because this is your kid. You're worried. You're afraid. You feel all the things that you feel. So it's a time when your feelings are going to be at their pinnacle, but when your need to make decisions based not on your emotional state or your child's emotional state is going to be enormously helpful. And I think every parent who's gone through any struggle with their child knows that feeling. I remember being with my boys when they were little, and we went into this little like general store. It was on the way up to the lake and it was hot. And we stopped in to get something. They had these little bowls of popcorn out as a sample. And so I said to my younger son, you can have a little bit, but this is for everybody. Well, he went up and he grabbed the whole bowl of popcorn and shoved it in his little fat face. And the woman who ran the store was sort of looking from behind the counter, sort of appalled by my child's behavior and waiting for me to do something. So I said, that was not very polite because this was for everybody. And he was old enough to know it wasn't like he was a year and a half old. He was probably like 3.5 or 4. And I said, do you see how that woman is looking at you right now. She is not very happy with what you did. You need to go and apologize to her because you just shoved all the popcorn in your face. And he dug his heels in the ground. And I thought, all right, I got to stick with this. That little bugger, we were in that hot general store, probably like 12 minutes. And finally he walked up and he goes, I'm sorry for eating the popcorn. I go, okay, now we could go. The feelings that I had, it was like I was embarrassed. I was totally frustrated with him. I wanted to get to the lake. My other son was like, what the heck is going on? And I was like, I cannot let my feelings right now dictate what I do next.
Let's take a quick break, and then we will be right back.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the Jumbotron first, before attempting to eat a stack of Supreme nachos in one bite. Now you're just a meme that everyone shares on game day. Checking first is smart, so check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
Okay, so now back to the show. All right, so you're going to ask those how questions. Now, here's what I'm fully aware of. These come very naturally to me because I've been doing it for decades. It is hard sometimes to figure out what the how question is that you're supposed to be asking yourself or asking your children. And sometimes just start by saying the word how and then go from there. And think about the stories that we've told you, because I love that story yet about the priest asking, well, how are you going to raise your children? How are you going to decide where to live? How are you going to handle your relatives, or all the questions? And begin to think, what is the how question that I'm going to ask that's going to help me see the sequence of this and that's going to help me take some action? I could say, how do you teach a child that they need to listen to you in a store and not fill their face with popcorn? Right? Well, then you have to tell them, it's over and over and over again.
You've talked a lot about front loading.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and dad could even write it down the night before, because a lot of times these struggles are not brand new. They're very repetitive.
Yep.
Can you write down what you will say and even offer yourself an underlined statement? Vanilla ice cream. Stay calm.
Yeah. Question really is like, how am I going to stick to the plan even when the emotions get high? Right? That's another really, really important question to ask. This is not easy, but I think these how questions really, as we said at the beginning, really push you toward action. They push you toward breaking things down into parts. It helps when you're feeling overwhelmed, and it takes you out of the very powerful emotional state that we all get into, of course. It's just not very helpful as you're trying to help your anxious child. I want to just make one little plug here. Speaking of anxious children, I'm doing a webinar on April 1st, and it is going to be 2 hours on April 1st in the evening, 6:30 Eastern Time, and then 2 hours on April 8th, 6:30 to 8:30 Eastern Time. It's going to be on Zoom, and it is going to be recorded, which I don't often do with my workshops, but this one is going to be recorded, and everybody who registers will immediately get the recordings. The format is going to be that I'm going to give a lot of information in the first 2 hours, and then I'm going to give homework assignments or things for people to work on. And then we're going to come back for the second 2 hours, and we're going to do follow-up and check and see how it went. So it's going to be packed with a lot of the stuff that I talk about on the podcast, and it's going to be just very direct teaching from me. So if you're interested in that, I will put the link in the show notes for you, and then we'll also get it up on my website, lynlyons.com.
Tomorrow's Friday, so you're probably not seeing clients.
Yeah.
Did you see any?
I am.
Oh, you are seeing clients.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any today, actually, when we're recording on a Thursday, but I am. I'm seeing a few tomorrow.
Okay. How old are these kids? Give us a little window into what
my
that
day
session
is
like.
I am seeing a family that I've been working with for a while, and the child will be in school during this session, but the parents are going to come together without actually, I think of the sessions I have tomorrow, they're all just with parents. Actually, they're all just with parents. So, and the kids range in age. But yeah, so tomorrow is going to be Friday of me talking to parents and coaching parents and doing a lot of seeing where the success is and where they're getting stuck. And I am going to ask some how questions. I can give you that.
Great.
There's going to be a lot of how questions.
And is little Kitty prohibited from the client room during sessions?
Yes, she's a monster. Kids love to see her. She's bitten a few people.
Nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And compared to my rag doll, Stuart, who is just a delight, she's very entertaining. But it's very interesting because kids that have cats find her very entertaining. She can come in for a little visit. Families that don't have cats are really scared of her because I open the door and she comes running into the office at like 40 miles an hour. She only weighs 5 pounds, but she is like a little Tasmanian devil. Yeah. So we have to keep her out.
So what decisions did you make when selecting a little Tasmanian devil?
Well, I will tell you that when she was a little 1 pound monkey that we brought home, and your son had such a sweet, remember, she was so sweet. My husband's theory about this, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, is she went to get spayed. She actually went into heat twice before we got her spayed because she went into heat early and she was too little to spay. And then we went and got her spayed and she came back, and my husband thinks that when she got spayed, that she got really mad and she's been a crazy kitty ever since. She is not so crazy with me, and she just has a lot of energy, but that's his theory. She was adorable when she was a little kitten. She's still adorable now, but she's just got a lot of energy. Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.